Hello legends and super legends, welcome to Veloharmony. I put on my retro Peloton shirt today because today we're going old school. One of our earliest subscribers to the channel, Simon Moses, had put in a request. I mentioned it in the last group ride we did in the Montgomery Hills. And I'm going to paraphrase. His fitness has improved over time and he's getting to the point where he feels like he may need to upgrade his chain set. And so I decided he wanted my insights. And so I decided to take this approach. You know, when do you need to change your chain set? Is there ever a good time? Is there ever a good reason? And so I want to give the details so that he can make a good decision. But I felt like this would be a topic that would benefit all cyclists. So let's start this way. There are different kinds of chain sets out there. I would start with what everybody's probably familiar with, the 39 inner ring. This marker is pretty much dead. 39 inner ring by 53 big chain ring. Okay, that's basically your ratio on the crank set. Now they have what is called compact crank set. So you've got a compact has a 34 inner ring and a 50 big chain ring. Put it on this side. Then in the middle here, we've got what is called a mid-compact, which is a 36 inner ring by 52 big chain ring. Okay. It doesn't really matter what chain ring Simon is using that he's thinking about upgrading from, because I think he feels that the gear ratios are just too small. He's always looking for larger gears and so forth. And I think he said because his fitness improved or whatever. But the main reason you want to consider getting your chain set changed is based on the terrain that you ride in most of the time. So I'm going to take me for an example first, and I will give you other examples. In the general Houston area, the 3953 is perfect because mostly it's flat to maybe 1 or 2%. Now, I'm not talking about the videos you see. I know a lot of people come on here and they put comments and say, oh, you call those hills or whatever. Where we were riding on the north side, I specifically moved from the west side of town to the north side, or kind of west central, I guess, to the north side, because we have up to 6-7%. Yeah, they're not very long, but when you're riding, anybody who rides, you guys know, it doesn't matter how long it is. When you're hanging on for dear life and you got a speed where, yeah, I'm doing great, you can maintain it, and the wind picks up or the road kicks in, that can be all it takes for you to get dropped from that wheel. You guys know what I'm talking about. So it doesn't really matter. When people mention stuff like that, what it tells me is they're not riding. Because if you're riding, 1% makes a difference if you're in the right kind of gear. That's what Simon's going after. He's saying, do I need to upgrade here? You know, you don't want to just spend money and then find out, oops, I messed up. Maybe I should have kept or whatever. And I think that's what he's driving at. So what I want to stress is that if you're in an area that's mostly flat to very few slight grades, 1 to 2, 3%, the 3953 is perfect. Now, the reason why I keep saying 3953 because it's become kind of a standard. When I used to compete, we rode 4253 because most of the races held in the Houston area were flat. I mean, you'd be in a downtown area, a circuit course around the buildings. It's just flat. So 4253 was very common. And in fact, in the back, people ran a 23 as their largest or smallest ratio sprocket in the back. A 23 was considered to be, you know, a low gear because it's just very flat. So the first thing you want to look at is your terrain. Regardless of your fitness, what is the terrain that you ride in? If you're living somewhere where out the door you're hitting a 4, 5, 6% climb, you may want to keep that 34 ring. I don't know what Simon has. You may want to keep that 34 or that 36 because that's your warm up. It helps you when you're just starting the ride. You don't want to start a ride going full gas. So that's your first decision maker, your terrain. Okay? Or secondly, the terrain you're going to ride. So your riding environment. So even if you live in a terrain where the bigger, let's say 3953 or 4253 would work, where do you do most of your riding? So the riding environment, I will call it that. Where do you do most of your riding? Which is almost synonymous with terrain, but I kind of want to put riding environment because you can live in a certain terrain and then maybe most of the time you throw your bike in the car and you drive it to work and you ride with people in another area. Where you do your most riding should dictate what kind of ratio you have. If you're dealing with a lot of 15%ers all the time, or let's say 10%ers, and then you're going downhill all the time, then you may want to think about, okay, the 3450 is fine, but then the reason I laid it like this, so to link this to your rear cassette for that combination now. In the back, you may want to consider having an 11 to maybe, let's say 28 or even 30. So let's say 1128. Okay, Shimano goes to 28. I think Campy goes to 27. They may have smaller sprockets now, but when I was getting mine, I ended up with a 27 for my Campy. And when I bought the Shimano wheels, they had a 28. They may have a 30 now. I don't know. But what makes this decision is based on where you ride. Because you can have a 3450, which is a compact. And if you have the wrong rear, like I said, in Houston here, people will have like, I think it was like 8 or 9 speed, then they would go up to a 23. A 23 is not enough in hilly terrain, even with a 34. So that's what you got to base it on. And I'm going to get to what I'm driving at with the sprocket in a little bit, to how you can make your decision further. So let's say 1128, and you do the same thing here. 1128. You tie it to your mid compact. That's what I don't even have an 11. I ride a 1228 11 speed. When you have an 1128 11 speed, it will probably drop one of your middle gears. Might be a 16 or something like that. I don't like losing my 16. I like that cog. I would do the same thing here. And let's say 1128. And then we'll come back 1128. So let's say we're all riding 1128, whether it's 10 speed, 11 speed. You've got an 11 tooth cog and you've got a 28, which is relatively small. So in this situation with a 3450, in a flat area like where we live, like Paul lives here and he rides a 3450 on 2 of his bikes, most of the time you end up spending time in the 50 because the 34 under a 3% climb, it's just not going to be used much. Even the ride that we did in the Montgomery Hills, we only got on the small chain ring once when we hit a 7 or 8% climb going into Anderson. That's the only time we used the 34. And that's what Simon is leading towards. It's like he's spending time either in the big chain ring, and then he's finding that I'm mostly in my, let's say 14, 15, or even 13. And, you know, maybe I need to upgrade my chain set to where I have a bigger inner ring to where I don't have to be so far down the cluster in the back. So your two options are, before I go into how you make your decision that I recommend, your two options are you can upgrade your chain ring to any combination you want. These are just the standards I listed. You can buy any chain ring within reason, as long as the changes are not too big between this, like 34 to 50. You don't want to go smaller than a 34 and still have a 50. The shifting will be messed up. Just like you can do a 42, 53. Some of the pros will go to like a 39, 54 in time trials or a race that's going to be real hilly. So if you're finding out that the 5311, let's say you're riding a 3953 and the 5311 for where you ride most of the time, when you're going down that hill or the wind's behind you, man, I'm spinning out my 11. You ask yourself, the first thing is 3, question yourself. And we'll summarize when I'm done. Question yourself. Am I always spinning out my last cog? Let's say I've got a 12, you've got an 11. Am I always spinning out my last cog every day I go down my favorite mountain or my favorite hill? If so, the least expensive way to fix that particular problem is to just go from a 53 to maybe a 54. Because if you already got an 11, that is. If you had a 12, you just get something with an 11. That's the fix, because it's not very expensive to do that. Chain set changes are more expensive, they're more costly. But there are other ways to save money there. But besides the money, you need to make sure you're doing the right thing. So question yourself. When I get out and I hit, let's say, a climb in my area that I always ride on this route, do I use the small chain ring? If you never use the small chain ring, is the big chain ring enough? Meaning, if I'm riding this 50 all the time, do I feel like I could use a 53 because I'm running through the gears too early to where I'm riding a 50-12 most of the time, and I'm not maxing it out, and I'm spinning at my cruising cadence? Question yourself, and I'm going to put under here your cadence, okay? If you're riding at your cruising cadence, the cadence your body likes that you always use, you're riding at that cadence all the time, and I'm going to assume it's 75 or higher, okay? This is the cadence I like to ride in. And I'm still sitting in the 12 when everybody else is in the 17. I'm way down the cog because I got a 50. Because where we live, we have lots of downhills, lots of tailwind, that kind of stuff. So then you must think that, oh, maybe I may want to consider upgrading this to a 3953 if that's the case. But it's not an easy decision to make. But let's say only once in a while you're spinning out the 50-12 or you're being forced to go in. If it's only once in a while, then you just consider spinning it faster when it happens. If it's not happening frequently, that you're running out of gears at your cruising cadence, then you don't need to go bother spending the money. But if it's happening all the time and you're like, man, you know, this stuff is just too low. Just like the example where I said, Paul spends most of the time in the 50. You know, I personally did not go from a 3953 on my orange bike. I had a 3953. I did not go to the 34 for that very reason. I went to the 3652. So I only dropped one tooth cog on the big chain ring and went down 3 on the inner ring. Because even if we go out to where we went in Montgomery County, 52 with what I have in the back, I have a 12-28. That's plenty, because the 25 is like a 54 or 55 inch gear. I can climb most things under 8% of thereabouts with if I stayed in the big chain ring. And then the 36 would be enough. But don't base it on the fact that one day you spun out that gear when you had the perfect tailwind. Or one day you went somewhere for one time and you spun out your 11. And then you say, do I need to buy? If you're spinning it out all the time while your cadence is around your cruising cadence, then yes, you may want to consider upgrading to it. Now, it depends on where you are. If you have a 3450, your decisions are, do I go to a 3953 or a 3652? The least expensive way to do that is to make sure you measure what they call the bolt diameter. They call it BCD. The chain rings attach in a format. Let's say I'm going to say this is the crank arm that's in the bottom bracket on the bike, and then you got the what is like a spider. Okay, some of them have 4, some of them have 5, whatever. I'm just going to do a rough sketch here. So let's say you've got an attachment coming from here to where the chain rings now are attaching at different points on this spider. Okay, that's kind of a rough depiction of what it looks like. These distances between these bolts are very specific to the kind of chainring brand you have. Some of them are 110. Some of them are, and they'll say like 110 BCD. Some of them are 130 BCD. Something to do with bolt clearance diameter. I think it's bolt diameter. I'm not sure what the C means. I'd have to look that up. But it's not that critical. A lot of them are stamped on them. They'll let you know what is 110, 130. You need to know that if you're going to invest on your own to get just the chain rings with the teeth on it. Because you can remove the chain rings off of the spider and put another one on there if you get the right BCD for your crank arm combination. So let's say you're riding a 172.5 here. You don't have to replace this if it's fine. Just change the chain ring. You want to change them in pairs because you don't want too much gap. You don't want to go buy a 53 and then leave the 34 there. Your shifting you'll be dropping chain all the time. So get them in the recommended pairs that they sell them in. So it's less expensive to just buy the chain ring, loosen these bolts and put them on there. Make sure you use a torque wrench, or at least, because the bolts are very delicate. But a lot of these manufacturers will recommend that you use new bolts every time you change those chain rings. And I recommend a torque wrench when you put them in, because then you get rid of creaking and get rid of the risk of them loosening. Okay, so that's the least expensive way to do that. You don't have to buy the whole thing. It stays on the bike. You take the chain, you just drop the chain off, and you can loosen that and do it yourself. If you have the right torque. If you don't, drop it by a bike shop, your local bike shop. They'll put it in there in a few minutes. Doesn't take long. That's the cheapest way to do that if you find that you want to upgrade just up front. If you're on the fence and you say, my up front is fine, but I don't have enough low gears in the back. Let's say you got a 1223 or something. Say your smallest cog in the back is a 23. And you're saying that, man, if I got a 28, which is a big jump from 23, you're not going to go 23 to 28. You say, if I got a cassette where I could have a 23, 25, 28, or 23, 25, 27, that gives you a nice range in the back. If you're finding in the instance where you're saying, man, I'm in the 23 here and I could use something lower. Simon Moses' issue was, I'm in this gear here and I can use something higher because I'm riding it as fast as I like, and I still feel like I want more speed. So then he still has those two options to either upgrade the chain ring or get larger cogs, larger ratio cogs in the back. Now, chances are he already has an 11, I'm guessing. If you already have an 11, then you've exhausted that. So that means he's got either a 3450 in the front or a 36. I think he's got a 3450. So if you got a 50 and you're in your 12 or your 11 and you're feeling that, man, I come down this hill all the time, or when the wind's behind me frequently, I'm spinning out this bad boy and that group is just pulling away from me. Or I'm spinning out this bad boy and I feel like I want to go faster than when I'm pedaling. So your choices are, can you pedal it faster for that periodic occurrence, or you're saying that I'm already pedaling it as fast as I can and I feel like I still got more that I could get out of a bigger cog. Then what you would do is you would say, this chain ring 3450 is too small. Let me upgrade it, and you could get those two cogs and just put it on there. So for me, if I were riding a 3450 and in a 5012 and I spin it out, yeah, then when you're really in a 5012, you're really going fast, so it's pretty fast. How often that happens, I don't know, but I think in cases where you're descending, because some of the pros will even stick a 55 on their bike or a 54 on their bike on a course where they say, man, it's a long descent and I want to make up some time or something like that. So if you're living in an area where you're finding that the 50 is not enough and you want to go up to a 53 while you keep the same thing in the back, that's fine. So let me summarize by saying that this way. You can increase your gear ratio by changing your chain rings or changing the cogs in the back. Now, if you're spinning out the gear and you feel like you still got more and you need a bigger cog and you're on a 12 or an 11, if you're on a 12, you can get an 11. But let's say you're on an 11 and that's what's out now. I don't believe they have a 10. I don't even think you want to have a 10, because the smaller those things get physically, the harder they are to turn. There's no leverage. So from a physics standpoint, at some point, they're going to have to stop going down. They just don't get practical after that, So let's say you're in an 11 and you're spinning that bad boy out and you're saying, man, this 50 that I'm in up front is just holding me back because I'm flailing this thing around. Then, yeah, you can change your chain ring up there to get that. But let's say it's only happening once in a while and it's rare. Why spend the money? But if it's regularly happening, then yes, that's a reason to do an upgrade. You already got the biggest cog in the back. You need to go ahead and do the chainring. But if it were the opposite to where you're saying I need something smaller and you already got a 50, which is not the case with Simon. You already got a 50 and you're saying I'm in this 50-23 in the back and man, I could use a 25 or I could use a 28. That's time to get a new cog set back there, a cassette. You know, they sell them in sets. Some of them you can take apart and replace just the cog, but you need to really know what you're doing because you don't want to jump too much in the back. And some of the cog sets are made specifically for a certain slot in that cluster in the back. It's a little more complicated and it's expensive to spend. They're usually like anywhere from $200 to $300 for a cassette back there. They're not inexpensive. You can find deals, but I just want to give you an idea as to what causes the problem. So if you need something smaller, you can drop your crankset smaller, or you can get a bigger cog as far as a physical bigger cog in the back than what you currently have. But if you need to go up because you're spinning out the gears you're in, then you can look at, do I need to change my crankset or do I need to get an 11 versus the 12 that I currently have? Or if you have, you know, something smaller than the 12, then you say, oh, let me go to a 12. But most of the stuff nowadays start at 12. You know, I don't think anything starts smaller than that. Those was back in the day when, even back in the day, they had a 12. There were bigger jumps because you had 8 or 9 speed. And so there were bigger jumps. So the key is that if you need a larger gear, your crankset and your cogs are the choices you look at as far as what do I have now, where do I go to? It's not a direct subject to say, go do that specifically. That's why I took this approach of explaining that if it's not something that's happening all the time, you just kind of go ahead and spin faster that one time it happens. Increase your cadence beyond what you're used to. If it's something that's happening all the time and you feel like, man, I'm spinning this thing out. If you're spinning at 110, 120 and you feel like you could do more, then yeah. And if it's happening all the time, then yeah, you definitely can look at increasing the crankset if you've already exhausted the fact that I've got an 11 in the back. So when you've got the largest possible sprocket back there from a gear inch side, then you focus on the front. What do I need to do up here? Okay. So I hope this will help a lot of you make those kind of decisions when it comes to crankset. Think about it because it hits your pocketbook. And if you're going to DIY, please torque the bolts. Lube them with some grease when you change them and torque them. When you buy the chain ring, they will come with new bolts. If they don't, you need to order them. Whoever you get it from, they should come with new bolts because they sell them with the bolts. Because the bolts that you remove, a lot of the manufacturers don't recommend that you reuse them. You could, but they just want to be on the safe side. Like for my bike, the bolts I took off, they shipped them with new bolts. They're so light. They're like the thinnest, aluminum bolts. And so just torque them. And the reason why you torque them is you take the guesswork out. You won't damage them and they won't be too loose. It takes, it's done right and you don't have to worry about it. But it's not something you want to be changing all the time. So you really have to think about it because not only is it costly, it can be a hassle. Okay, so I hope this addresses the problem. For those of you who have additional questions about it, post them below. We'll do our best to answer them. But I just wanted to kind of get this video out there. It's not something you're going to be doing every day because most of the bikes now, I'm finding a lot of the bikes are coming with compact chainset 3450. And that's really good because a lot of new cyclists don't spin very well. They don't know that they're supposed to spin. I see a lot of riders, they're out there and you can tell they're novices, but they're not spinning. They're pedaling so slowly and they don't understand that spinning is the way to go. It increases your enjoyment. So it's good to see the industry putting 3450, like the bike Paul got came with a 3450, the Giant. So it's good to see that because I like the smaller ratios. If I were to move somewhere that had a lot of climbs above 8%, I would definitely be riding a 3450. Because I switched to the 3652 on my orange bike specifically for a place called Chapel Hill, where they got 10% climbs. I mean, we'll do that later in the year. But they've got awesome climbs out there. And in the area we're going in Montgomery, some of the climbs in excess of 9%. Yes, I'm on the 36 or the 39, 25, which is very low. So yes, there is nothing macho about muscling a big gear. It doesn't mean you're tough. It means you're just trying to mess up your knees and kill your back. So ride the proper gear. So that's why Simon is asking, because he's saying that his fitness has improved and he's finding that he's constantly probably spinning out these gears. And so if it's happening often and you have an 11 in the back, just focus on the chain rings. If you already got it back there and you're spinning out the 11 or whatever, or maybe you're spinning out a middle gear, maybe a 16 is missing. Look at what cogs you have back there. That could be the reason. And so hopefully this will address that and give you an idea in what direction to go into. But that's the way to do it. You don't have to go to a shop unless you don't have a torque wrench. I do recommend a torque wrench for this. Reason being is the bolts are very, very delicate. They're small. And I don't like to do guesswork on small bolts. The bolts at the handlebar area, I don't guess. I use torque. The bolts that hold your stem, I use torque. Because then you're done. Because that's where your arms are. If you don't tighten them well and they start working their way loose, you're riding down the road and you hear creaks and it's just annoying. It bothers you. Okay? So get your K's in. I hope I answered that question. If I didn't, put your comments out there. We'll support the video with our answers. And that way you'll be able to make the right decision for what you need for you.